Hey guys, so if you know me, you know I've had the Cougar for quite a while, and it's had the C4 automatic transmission in it for quite some time, and it was time for that to finally go. So ended up putting a Tremec T5 transmission in it, and this is kind of the story of why I did it, how I did it, what parts I used, and some of the side projects that I did while I was working on that. Because as you know, if you take one thing apart, there's going to be other projects to do, especially if you're a car guy. You definitely, you know how that is. So I'm just going to cover that kind of stuff. Why I did it is probably the easiest question to answer. If you're a car guy, I really don't even need to explain this one to you, but you know, manual transmission just obviously makes you more connected to the car. It's way more fun to drive, especially on back roads and curvy back roads and stuff like that. So it's right up my alley. It's something I've been wanting to do for a long time, so I was finally able to do it. Huge shout out to my cousin and her husband, because of them, I was able to get a really good deal on a used T5. Came with a shifter, a clutch, ram pressure plate, and a Bellhousing to go with it as well. So ended up getting a really good deal on it. And I probably would have done a 4-speed, because if you know me, you know I'm kind of a period correct snob. I like to try and keep things looking correct for the period that they came out of. Because if you own an old car, that's kind of the point of owning an old car to me, is it's taking you back to a different era that I wasn't a part of, and it just kind of makes me feel more connected to it. Ultimately, I was okay with using a 5-speed though, because it's something you don't see while you're driving. Functionally, you know, you get the lower RPMs while you're cruising, especially down the highway, and I do a decent bit of that, so that was really nice. And you know, you can put an old school Hurst shifter on it, which I did, and so ultimately it still looks period correct in the car, other than the ball having 5 on it instead of 4 speeds. So once I got my T5, it's pretty much a research project from there on out. It was going to, you know, forums, YouTube, just kind of seeing how other people, you know, went through the process of converting their cars and what parts they used. And for me, I ended up using mostly modern driveline, because they had a lot of what I needed to do this project, including the drive shaft. I ended up going with an aluminum one just because our local shops weren't very reputable, and I knew I was going to have to cut down my original one. So just using a brand new aluminum one ended up being great. It fit perfectly. I took the measurements exactly as they specified and got exactly what I wanted from that. As far as other things, I got some of the springs and brackets from National Parts Depot, because I ended up doing an equalizer bar. I know most people like to do either like a hydraulic or cable clutch when they do a T5 conversion, but again, I'm kind of a period correct snob, so kind of wanted to go the Z-bar route, and I ended up going with a rollerized Z-bar kit from Open Tracker Racing, run by John and Sherry over there in California. Great people. Their Z-bar, it's a beefed up competition one, and it's a really good piece. It has, I believe, a piece of rebar welded onto it, so it kind of beats it up, and it's probably a great Z-bar to use. Unfortunately, I could not use it because it did not clear my headers, so I ended up having to buy a JBA Speed Shop specific for clearing headers, and it worked pretty great. I just had to, or I ended up using the rollerized bearings that came with the Open Tracker kit with the JBA Z-bar, and that worked out great. I also bought a roller bearing kit for the pedal box. If you're familiar with the pedal box, they come with like these kind of crappy plastic bushings and whatnot. They're not good for longevity, and they're just not that smooth after a while. So I went ahead and did this because it's a pretty common mod, especially if you're going to be messing with that. And if you're doing, you know, going to be putting a third pedal in there, you might as well do it. And we'll talk more about it later, but it was a really great mod. I recommend doing it if you haven't already. So the parts that I got from Modern Driveline, it's quite the list, so I kind of wrote it down, but I got from them a cross member, a Bellhousing adapter for my specific T5. So my T5, based on the code, came out of a later 90s V6 Mustang, and it has a slightly longer input shaft. So because of that, you have to put about a 1-inch aluminum plate, adapter plate, between the transmission and the Bellhousing. Kind of sucks, but it is what it is. and I went with it. So aside from that, I also got the clutch fork and adapter kit for Z-bar use for Modern Driveline. And it was pretty easy to modify my bell housing to be able to do this. Essentially, you're just drilling 2 holes to put a pivot on there for your clutch fork, and that's really about it. It comes with an instructional sheet on how to do it and where to drill the holes and all that. So it's pretty self-explanatory, not hard to do. I also got throw out and pilot bearings and bushings from them, the Hirsch shift lever arm, the boot that goes with it, flywheel, bolt kits, and unfortunately I could not get a shift fork boot. They do sell one, but it's not going to work with this specific setup. Nobody actually makes a, that I know of, correct me if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments, but nobody makes a shift fork boot that is compatible with a T5 with a clutch fork for an equalizer bar setup. And so I've made a CAD profile to make the molds for one. I haven't actually 3D printed it yet. I need to, and then I'll make my own boot, and if anybody else wants one, then I'd be glad to try and make it for you as well. But just let me know in the comments below, and we'll see about getting that done. Alright, so now we got all those parts. Installing them really wasn't too bad, and if you have any kind of decent mechanical ability, and you can go on YouTube, you can go on Google, research things, look at parts manuals, and all that kind of stuff, you're probably not going to have too much trouble just doing the conversion in general. It's pretty easy. Aside from that, I mentioned I did some of the other side projects while I was in there, the pedal box being one of them, because I went to rollarized bearings, and I ended up pretty much just restoring the whole pedal box. So, I don't know if y'all have seen other videos of it being done. There's not a whole lot out there, but one of my favorites was Andy Cruz. He does a lot of Mustang restoration project videos, and I love his stuff, but I would have done one thing different than him, and I did do it different from him, was using a unibit or a speed bit, whatever you want to call it, one of these guys right here. And using that instead of a die grinder to cut off the old existing bushings that are already built into the pedal box just kind of helps you from scraping up the pedal box too bad. This essentially weakens it if you can go like the full size, and then once you've done all of that, then you can put it into a vise, take a chisel and a hammer, smack it, and essentially you'll defeat the bushing that's already in there. It'll come out nice and clean. You're not going to have a bunch of scrapes and cuts on the side of your pedal box if that's something you're concerned about. I might be a little more anal than others are about that kind of thing, but I wanted mine to be pretty, so I did it that way. Let's see, after that, I got my box all powder coated, installed the new bearing kit, and modified a 67 automatic brake pedal, and just kind of cut it down so it would fit for a manual setup with the third pedal. Had all these parts powder coated by my buddy Ryan. We've done a video on him before, does great stuff. I'll put his contact information down in the bio just so y'all can see it. But he's a great guy. If y'all need powder coating done, he'll get it done for you. Other than that, other modifications I did in that area, I put in a adjustable brake push rod instead of having just the standard length one. That way I can adjust where my brake feel is, my travel, if you will. That way it makes it easier to adjust it for heel toe braking, which is something that I like to do in my cars. So that was a big one. Aside from that, I put grip tape on the brake and gas pedals just to make them a little more grippier, easier to touch, all that kind of stuff. But in the future, I'm thinking about making the brake pedal a little bit bigger and making the gas pedal, maybe putting a tab on it or something, just to make it a little easier to blip it when I'm downshifting. But we'll see. I'm going to kind of play with it, experiment with it, and if y'all are interested, I'll make a video on that and kind of the process I took to come up with those little designs. So another weird thing was the really big clutch return spring that goes on the pedal box. I did not find a need for it. My car functions perfectly well without it. I'm not entirely sure why. I took it off and it just worked, and I didn't spend too much time thinking about it. If you know why, let me know down in the comments below, but for whatever reason it works for me, so I'm not going to go and put it back in there when it doesn't need to be in there, and it's hard to install anyway, so, and it's lighter weight, so race car, right? So one of the other projects that I tackled while pretty much manual swapping the whole car was going to manual steering. Number one reason for that would probably be for road feel. If you've driven an old school 60s car with power steering, you know, pretty much it's just one finger is all you need to turn the steering wheel. And there's not much road feel to it when you do that. So, aside from that, the systems they're kind of messy. I feel like mine, I got it to be pretty dry, but every now and then it would still drip, and they're just kind of annoying for that. Second, I burned through at least 3 hoses, and I used multiple different heat shield products, and there just was not a good way to run the hose past the headers and not touch on them or kink on something. So I just kind of simplified it by taking the system out, and I got better road feel out of it. In addition to all that, I used Open Tracker's rollarized bearing steering components, and I haven't driven a whole lot of non-power steering cars to know if it made that much of a difference, but it feels pretty good to me. Of course, you know, driving a parking lot is always going to be hard with a non-power steering car, but other than that, it drives and handles phenomenally, and I'm not disappointed that I took it off. Just has much better road feel, and it's a lot more fun and enjoyable in a lot of ways. So, yep. So one of the other things that I did when I made pretty much a manual rebuild of this whole car was going to manual brakes. This one's pretty self-explanatory, I think. You go to a bigger cam, you're not going to have enough vacuum to provide for the power brakes, for the power booster. Aside from that, you know, it kind of simplifies the system, lightens it up, because you can get rid of that power booster. You bring your brake reservoir in closer to the firewall, gives you a little more room to work on things, and eventually I will go to a bigger cam, and this kind of gets me used to the way that brake pedal is going to feel whenever I do go to that point. So now I'm just kind of thinking ahead, you know, building the car out. So, yep, lighter and simpler. Ended up going with a 1-inch bore mastered cylinder, which gave me pretty good brake feel. It's nice and solid. The car brakes great. I haven't had any issues with it, and you know, I do some fairly spirited driving on back roads, so it hasn't been an issue for me yet. With that solid brake feel, you have to give it a pretty solid push. That's just how manual braking cars are. So with that, you know, Mustangs, Cougars, they're known for kind of having flexing firewalls, and so I wanted to reinforce that. I ended up building my own reinforcement plate, took some template paper, drew out what I thought I needed, put it onto some 1/8-inch steel, and kind of made my own reinforcement plate. It was modeled after the Hain Performance one. If you haven't seen it, theirs has a couple of Heim joints that go to another plate that's located on the back of the shock tower. So that way there's absolutely no flex whatsoever. And that's how I built mine to be. I even put the tabs on it and bought the Heim joints and all that, the rods and everything. But once I put it together and I put just the basic reinforcement plate on, we bled the brakes and all that, and I pushed on it as hard as I could. We pretty much had no flex, so I decided not to go with the back of the shock tower bracket just because it's extra weight, more complexity, and once you put those rods in there, it kind of gets in your way of working on stuff in that part of the engine bay. So it was just simpler and lighter to go without that, and I'll probably make another reinforcement plate sometime in the future, one that doesn't have those tabs on it, just so it's simpler and lighter again, and prettier to look at in the long run. But that pretty much sums up the majority of the manual swap stuff that I did to the car. But while I was doing all that, there were kind of a few other side projects that I wanted to do, and it was just a good time to do it. So I put new engine mounts in them because the originals, they were wearing out, and for whatever reason, 67 specific engine mounts are unique to 67. They're different, and pretty much you can't find them in the aftermarket world. So what I ended up doing was buying some Ron Morris Performance motor mounts. They allow for adjustability fore and aft and up and down. They're shiny, they're new, they're pretty, but they're pretty simple. They're easy to use, easy to install. I like them so far. They worked out pretty good. I'm probably going to powder coat them black in the future so they don't stand out so much. when you're looking in the engine bay. But other than that, they've been really good and I have no complaints. I also replaced my freeze plugs because I know some of them were getting a little bit corroded, and I just want to get a little more longevity out of my engine, so I put those in there. I also put on a 9-quart Canton Road Race oil pan. Also put studs on there on the bottom as well, instead of just using the bolts for the oil pan. So did those couple things with a 1-piece oil pan gasket. Also replaced the rear main seal because it was leaking, and after replacing it, I can see why. Whoever put it in the last time, they kind of messed it up. So that's been fixed. I also did a new radiator. Not entirely sure if I like this one. I mean, it cools great, don't get me wrong. It's a Champion radiator. Does phenomenally, but it's a little aftermarket-y looking, and I'd kind of like to go with something a little more period correct in the future. But while I had it in there, I also made some custom radiator mounts that are pretty similar to some of the ones that you could get on factory cars back in the days. They're kind of just like a clamp over the top, clamps on the bottoms. And I'll put some video overplay it so you can see it, but I was pretty happy with the way those came out because I pretty much bent them up once. They worked out perfect. Put some rubber insulators in them, installed it, and you can shake the car back and forth with no wiggle whatsoever in the mounts, and it just works out great. So I was pretty proud of that and the way it came out. Again, got those powder coated by my buddy Ryan. And then just kind of various other engine bay beautification efforts while I was in there, like the firewall area wherever I removed the brake reservoir. I wire wheeled it down to bare metal, primed it, got it pretty in there again, and spray painted it black. And this is kind of a temporary thing until I redo the whole car. Eventually that'll happen, but looks good for the time being, so I got that done. All right, so finally, pretty much my thoughts on how it drives after doing all this. The steering, you know, of course, like I said earlier, it's a little bit heavier, but it's not bad. Gives you a more direct, connected feeling to the way the car is driving. So honestly, kind of enjoy it. Going back to driving Dad's Mustang, it still has a power steering on it, and it kind of feels like too much after I've been driving this thing for a while. It's just, because again, it's just that fingertip steering, and it's just too powerful, and you can't feel the road. And I mean, you know, it has its perks, but for fun driving, I just prefer the manual steering is much better for me. The brakes, you know, a lot of people rag on having manual brakes. I don't find it to be that bad. It's a little more effort, but you know, it's not unbearable. I don't see why people don't like it that much. But yeah, so it's been good for me. I've got my brake pedal adjusted to where when I'm kind of pretty much at the bottom of it, I'm at the perfect spot to be able to blip the throttle to downshift, to heel toe downshift. So I really like that. And just having the manual transmission, being able to like heel toe downshift and roll through all the gears, whether I'm upshifting, downshifting, it's just so much more fun being in control of all that. I will say the only thing, maybe the next thing that I'll change, maybe, because I'm not looking to spend too much more on the car at the moment, except for stuff that I'm going to use in the future iteration of this car. But I would probably change the rear end gear ratio, make it something a little higher, because whatever I'm running that was for the factory C4 rear end, it's not very peppy. So something that's a little more peppy would be enjoyable, but other than that, it's still a pretty good time, and it's better than when it was an automatic. And the other thing, it's a used T5, so it's not perfect. There's a couple of the synchros that don't seem too happy, so there's a little bit of grinding going on, but you know, I'll deal with it. It's not too bad. Eventually I'll probably rebuild it just for the experience of doing it and just to say I've done it. Because it seems like kind of a fun thing to do. So aside from that, I'm really happy with all the modifications, the way they turned out, and the effects they've had on the car. It's just it's transformed the car into something that's a lot closer to what I wanted it to be. I'm still not quite there, and that's ultimately why I'm not wanting to spend too much money on little modifications right now, just because I have a vision of the car and how I want to build it, and in the next 5 years or so, it'll be probably a complete rotisserie, take it down, got to replace the floor pans, and do some other sheet metal work where it's not perfect, and just kind of get it just right, because I want to be able to track this car and feel comfortable in it and not be scared of it because it has some metal that's falling apart or rust holes or anything like that. So the car is kind of where it's going to be for a while. I think in the future I'm going to focus on doing some interior bits, like kind of doing more of a race car interior for what I have envisioned in the future, because that's something I can do relatively cheap, and I can mock it up while I'm still driving it and kind of go from there. But other than that, I'm not really looking at any performance mods at the moment. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this. I know for the, it might not be that entertaining for most people, but I kind of got to thinking, hey, I like this kind of stuff, so surely somebody else does, because I would have liked to watch this video when I was doing my transmission swap. If y'all have any questions on how I did it, what parts I used, or any of that kind of stuff, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact info for Instagram down in the bottom in the info, and yeah, feel free to reach out to me at any time, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned. We got a lot more stuff coming by.
Are crying. These eyes have seen a lot of loves, but they're never gonna see another one.